This week on Quadriga, Syria, a solution to the dilemma? Syria's chemical arsenal is already the subject of scrutiny by UN inspectors. But can it be brought under international control? Russia's announcement of a plan to do so has already had one effect. Military action by the United States has been put on hold. US President Barack Obama has said he wants to pursue all diplomatic options on Syria, but he has kept the military option open.
I don't want to talk to you about Syria.
Discussions are also moving slowly at the United Nations, where Russia rejected calls for a binding resolution on Syria. Questions remain about how Syria's chemical stockpile could be credibly monitored, given that war rages on in the country. Washington says there must be a response to the use of chemical weapons. But what should it be? Your host this week, Ali Aslan.
Hello and welcome to Quadriga. The Syrian conflict is entering yet another new and critical phase, one in which diplomacy is supposed to prevail. But there are still many unanswered questions about the proposal that Russia has put forth. Questions we will address on today's show together with three individuals who've been following the conflict in Syria very closely. Welcome to Hussam al-Din, who is a Syrian journalist and filmmaker. During his work as a journalist, he was arrested 5 times in Damascus before deciding to leave Syria. He was given political asylum in Germany and has been living in Berlin since 2012. Frederick Pleitgen is the Berlin correspondent for CNN. He has covered the Syrian conflict extensively and just returned from Damascus, where he conducted several high-profile exclusive interviews with high-ranking Syrian government officials. And Sergei Somleny is the Germany correspondent for the Russian business weekly magazine Expert. Previously, he worked as a producer for the German public broadcaster ARD in Moscow and served as editor-in-chief for the Russian TV channel RBC TV. Welcome to the program, gentlemen. Fred Pleitgen. Let's get right to it. A lot to talk about on today's show. And let's look at the origins of this proposal, supposedly set forth by Moscow. Many people say this proposal was born out of, if you will, a blunder made by Secretary of State John Kerry, that he simply misspoke at the press conference. Others disagree. They say, no, this was a deal hatched out by President Obama and President Putin at the G20 summit in St. Petersburg. What do you know about it?
I saw the statement being made, and I have to say that if this was something that was hatched out before, then Kerry did a pretty good acting job. I mean, first of all, that question came out of nowhere from the journalists. And then you saw him laugh off the proposal as he made it. And the things that are being discussed now is not what Kerry said. Kerry said, how can Assad avert military action is by putting all his chemical stockpiles under international control in 1 week and destroying them. Now, everybody knows that you're not going to destroy all those chemical weapons in a week, and you're certainly not going to lay them open as a civil war is going on. So I think that he misspoke, and I think that the Russians just seized on that very quickly, and they were diplomatically quite smart about it. And if something good comes out of it, I mean, I know that many people are very skeptical, including myself, then, you know, not bad.
Not bad, says Frederick Pleitgen, Hussam al-Din. By agreeing to the proposal set forth by Russia, Syria, for the first time, actually and officially acknowledged that it has chemical weapons. For you as a Syrian, was that a surprise?
Well, I'm not surprised because, for example, like 7 or 8 months ago, that Jihad al-Maqdisi, the Speaker of Foreign Ministry, says if they attack us by chemical weapons, we will attack and will defend ourselves by chemical weapons. So it means they have.
And the acknowledgement, Sergei Somleny, comes at a very critical stage, one in which many international observers are saying the proposal plus the acknowledgements and acceptance on the part of Damascus is simply a delaying tactic. This is simply a tactic to delay and distract President Obama from striking militarily in Syria. Would you agree?
Yes, maybe it's the lane, but it's the lane that is good for everyone. Look, it's good for Assad because he will not be hit by US Americans' missiles. It's good for Russia because Russia still can play the role of the peacemaker in the region and gain the authority. And it's good for Obama too, because actually if you look on his actions, he doesn't want to strike, but if he will be forced to strike, he will have no choice. But of course, he's happy that, I think he's happy, that he is not forced into the military mission with boots on the ground or without them, but into military action that will not bring the immediate peace.
And Frederick Pleitgen, it is true that President Obama is not exactly enthusiastic, or at least was not enthusiastic about getting into Syria. Now, since the red line has supposedly been crossed, his hands are somewhat tied. Do you think for whom is this a bigger relief, for President Assad or President Obama? This
well,
proposal?
it's certainly. I mean, it's certainly a big relief for President Assad, and it certainly is, and it really is good for the Russians. I mean, the Russians came out very good out of this. I think that the Obama administration had made the decision to conduct these strikes. But everybody knew that the strikes were not going to achieve anything. I mean, they were going to hit the chemical weapons arsenal, but it wouldn't make a difference in the civil war. And I think many people felt that that kind of action really doesn't do anything in effect. And of course, that also had the potential to draw America into the war. And it's something that couldn't be denied. I know the administration kept trying to say, well, these are pinpoint targeted strikes. But you got to ask yourself, what happens if Assad shoots back? I mean, I know he doesn't have the greatest arsenal in the world, but he does have some fairly long-range missiles. What happens if he shoots at an American destroyer? What happens if he takes down an American cruise missile? All of that kind of stuff could have happened, could have drawn the U.S. in. So I think the Americans weren't happy at the beginning because it really derailed a motion that had already been set in place. But then looking at it, they realized that it is something that could help them because Obama is very reluctant to get involved. And now, of course, the ball is in Assad's court, and it's in the Russians' court right now. They have to show that they're going to be able to follow through on all this, and that is a very, very difficult thing. A very difficult thing, not just from the point of view of Assad wanting to do it, but getting his whole bureaucracy, getting his army to open up like that, from knowing the Syrian military, is going to be something that's very difficult to achieve.
It is difficult indeed, Hussam al-Din. President Obama, even though he has agreed to Moscow's proposal, is saying that he's very skeptical, still very skeptical, that President Assad will follow through, that he will come through on the conditions that are being set on him. Are you also skeptical?
Well, in my opinion, I think al-Assad, he would like just to take more time. And for about Mr. Obama, he would like, he's against war in general. His policy that's against war, but he have to do something as a president of United States and one of the greatest country in the world. So he must react. But I don't think so. He's interested to do something, or because he can try to do something from, he would like to do something from the beginning, but he's against that.
But what about President Assad? Are you skeptical that he has any intentions of actually following up?
Well, I think he just need to keep his place on, and that's it. And he doesn't care about chemical weapons. But maybe he will do like Iranian situation. They can last longer time, so maybe a years, maybe he can hide something, like for example, the example in Libya. So there's many possibilities for these cases actually.
And this is a very complicated mission, isn't it, Sergei Somlani? Just the logistics of it that the UN inspectors, weapons inspectors would have in front of them are enormous. For one, there would have to be a ceasefire that all two sides, meaning President Assad, his troops, and the opposition would need to abide by to assure the safety and grant access to the inspectors. Plus, the weapons are very well hidden, as Frederick Pleitgen has already pointed out. Is this mission as good as it sounds on paper? Is it feasible at all in reality to implement?
Well, theoretically, yes. But of course, you're right. The country is in the civil war, and it's a severe, very brutal civil war that lasts for more than 2 years. And if you look at the country, you have fights within the capital, within the borders of the capital. If we it's very easy to say, well, in the suburb of Damascus, there was some use of chemical warfare and so many people have been killed. But if you compare it to Berlin, just imagine that Tegel in the northwest of Berlin is located approximately there where is the Assad stronghold with military air base, and the chemical weapon was used, if you will look on Berlin's map, somehow in Teltow or in Köpenick. Just imagine you have the capital city within tank battles, within usage of heavy artillery, of heavy shells, with usage of chemical warfare. And then, okay, the United Nations inspectors will come. They will, of course, if Assad wants to save himself.
And for those who don't know Berlin, I just want to point out that the city parts that you just mentioned are about 15 kilometers outside of the city center.
If we think about New York, it's somehow you have Assad on the northwest Manhattan and usage of chemical warfare somehow in JF Kennedy Airport. That are the distances in our case. And if the United Nations inspectors will come to Syria, of course they will use time, they will need time. Of course they will say, well, our security is not guaranteed and we need more time and this silo should be inspected, etc., etc. But in this case, everyone has an interest to the mission be done. And I think it is actually the key for the solution of the problem.
Frederick Plotkin, this mission is bringing back memories of Iraq, doesn't it? The government back then, the regime of Saddam Hussein, played cat and mouse games.
They did. I'm not sure that the Iraq, I know many people use the Iraq example, but I'm not sure that it is something that really works in this place. Because the thing about Iraq, when we were talking about generally weapons of mass destruction, it wasn't just chemical weapons, was that the Saddam Hussein regime denied they ever had them. And clearly the Syrians are a lot further than that. I mean, they're saying now, okay, yes, we do have this stuff. But it's true. The only way that a mission like that can work is if the Syrians come forward and say, this is where our stuff is, go and inspect it. And you're not just going to need a lot of inspectors because they have a big chemical weapons program, but you're also going to need people to provide their security. You're going to need, I don't think that you need a general ceasefire in Syria, but you're going to need one that is a ceasefire for those places where they're going to be. You're probably going to have to consolidate all this stuff in as few areas as possible, because otherwise it's almost impossible to catalog all these things. The one thing that many people forget is you don't only have to take stock of the chemical weapons stockpiles, you have to go to all the factories where this stuff is produced as well and keep those under lids as well. It's a gigantic task, and it's almost impossible, but it has been done. I mean, I know from the UN that actually they believe that what they did in Libya when Gaddafi was still in power worked quite well, because they cataloged everything, and they went back after the revolution in 2011, and they found everything was still there. Then there were a few shells that still showed up, but it really wasn't that significant. I mean, I know that even small amounts of chemical weapons are significant, but there wasn't very much there, and the stuff that they hadn't had there was in such a state that it couldn't be used anyway. So it can work, but I mean, it's a pretty tall task. But I do think that if this is used to set into motion a more comprehensive Syria strategy, then it can be something that's very good. If it breaks the ice between the Americans and the Russians, because those are the key players.
And you just returned from The Hague.
I just returned from The Hague, yeah.
What did you come away with?
Well, I came away with the obviously I was with the organization that put many of the inspectors on the ground, and they didn't talk very about the Syria mission, but they say that they can find stuff even after a long period of time. So this whole talk that we had before, people like William Hague saying that the mission is null and void anyway because it took them so long is not something that's true. And I mean, they seem to believe that it is something that could be done if everything is right. But of course, we know that in Syria nothing's right. So I mean, you got to make it right before you can actually put them in there.
Not a lot of things are going right these days in Syria. Indeed, Hussam al-Din, how is this proposal by Russia, how is this being perceived by the Syrian people? You must have still friends and family back home. Are they hopeful about this, or are they dismissing this as just a delaying plot on the part of Moscow and Assad?
Well, I will talk about my family, my people, because it's completely, my village, it's damaged. So most of them, they run away, escape in different country or like other safe places. But most of people, like, they feel insecure. They don't know what the solution. But in my opinion, the only solution could be the peaceful solution, to talk, to sit on one table and to talk. Because American attack will not solve the situation, could be worse actually, and could be also more blood. And also Al-Assad, he will not stay like calm. He will continue attacking like his own people, or what he called like Rebel or Freedom Army or Al-Qaeda. Unfortunately, also people like get mad and angry because of Al-Qaeda or some like people from Jabhat al-Nusra annoying, because in general Syrian people, they're more secular. They are not really religious in general, or maybe religious, but not like really by extremely like this way. So we are far away from those people, and we are really angry about this. So even if the system collapsed, we have the also nightmare from Al-Qaeda or Jabhat al-Nusra, unfortunately.
And Sergei Somleny, this resolution set forth by France in the UN Security Council is already being rejected by Moscow, because Moscow wants the provision, if you will, the elements of a strike left out altogether of a resolution, whereas President Obama says, no, we have to uphold the threat of a strike, otherwise this resolution has no teeth whatsoever. Do you think the Russians will give in on that?
Yeah, that's a trick, because the official position of Kremlin, and that's exactly what President Vladimir Putin writes in his article in New York Times that was published today. He says, well, the military intervention is legitimated only if the country has been attacked by another country and it's the act of self-defense, which is not the case, or under the approval of the Security Council of the United Nations. And, but it's clear that Russia is not ready to give the approval in the Security Council. That's why Russia can say, well, we need an approval of the Security Council, but we will not give our word for that. And the Russian position seems to be pretty clear. They say we need very strong evidences, the very strong arguments that the chemical weapon was used by Assad. But actually, any argument you can show us is not good enough. Now we come to the problem, what argument, what evidence could be good enough for Kremlin? And I personally assume that Kremlin will do everything to avoid the military intervention. And actually, this idea about the destruction of chemical weapon seems to be a good solution, because if the United States will strike, it will bring to a huge crisis in the relations between the US and Russia that will not be good for the world. And of course, if the United Nations inspectors will come into land, it will last years to destroy all the chemical weapons. In Russia, the huge chemical plants do this task for over a decade, destroying the Soviet chemical stockpiles. And if the United Nations inspectors will come to Syria and will start to do this job, I think it could be somehow the first step to regulate this conflict. And maybe then, step for step, there could be brought some more regulations in this severe conflict.
And U.S. strikes, says Sergei Somleny, would lead to much bigger problems between Moscow and Washington. But the truth is that the relationship is already very strained. In fact, so strained that some are saying it's a reminder and reminiscent of old Cold War mentality. Let's have a quick look.
The body language when Barack Obama and Vladimir Putin meet speaks volumes about their frosty relationship. Since their meeting at the G8 in June, things have only deteriorated. The case of former intelligence contractor Edward Snowden was one example. Washington wanted him to stand trial for espionage. Instead, Moscow gave him a passport and granted him asylum. Obama retaliated by cancelling a planned meeting with Putin. This toughness has also been apparent in the UN Security Council. Russia has persistently vetoed efforts to act against the Assad regime. Obama has said America is not the world's policeman, but he could take military action even without UN backing.
Without the use of force, particularly because Russia is one of Assad's strongest allies.
Putin has warned him against taking that course. It seems there can be no resolution on Syria if the US and Russia do not find a compromise.
Well, Fred, I think it's rather blatant that Russia and the United States have to come to an agreement in order for Syria to be solved. But Russia is not the only challenge for President Obama, is it? The American people as well. Look at the polls. Look at the New York Times poll. 72% of Americans are telling President Obama to stay out of Syria. And a whooping 79% are saying he didn't make the case at all for why the U.S. should even be involved.
Yeah, you know, there's two major problems that you're absolutely right about. I mean, the American public is sick of war. They've been at some form of war for the past, what is it now, 12 years since Afghanistan began, and they just don't want to spend the money. They don't want to have their troops in harm's way anymore because they're hurting at home. I mean, the American economy is still in a lot of trouble. Many people don't have jobs, and they feel that the president, who was elected to get America out of all these engagements, shouldn't be starting this at this point in time. And also, they didn't make much of a case. I mean, Kerry and the president himself came forward and talked about all this evidence that they have and that they're absolutely sure that Assad did this, but we never saw it. They talked about telephone conversations that they heard where apparently one high-ranking official called another high-ranking official and said, what's going on with the chemical weapons? But we never hear these things. You never hear the actual evidence, and that's something that people are wary of. I mean, they remember Colin Powell going to the Security Council, and everybody in America knows that all that was wrong. So sure, I mean, it's a very difficult case to make, but at the same time, Obama was elected president to solve difficult problems, and he's posed with a difficult problem that is going to be a major burden on his approval ratings. But I agree with Sergei. I think that the whole chemical weapons thing is very important to solve because chemical weapons are if that gets entrenched into this conflict, it will just make this the most horrible thing that's ever happened in a long, long time. But at the same time, it can function as a catalyst. If it brings the US and Russia together, then it can be something that's very important. And the thing that we always have to keep in mind, I think, is when the US goes at this, when Russia goes at this, what do we want to achieve in all this? And I think that what needs to be achieved is what Hussam said, is to preserve Syria as a secular, multi-ethnic society. That's got to be the main goal. That means that Christians, Alawites, Sunni, and Shia and Druze have to live there, have to be able to live there in peace. And the question is, how do you achieve that? And the only way is for the Russians and the Americans to come together and stop the killing as fast as possible. You got to stop the killing, and that's when you can start talking about solutions. And maybe this can be a catalyst if it works.
Maybe this can be a catalyst, says Fred Pleitgen, Hussam al-Din, but the Russian plan, if we look at it as well intended as it might be, doesn't really stop the bloodshed, current bloodshed in Syria, does it? It is completely focused on the removal of chemical weapons. But the killing, if you will, with and through conventional weapons are still going on as we speak.
Yeah, that's true, actually. Maybe it's safe, let's say, a big part, but also still like it's not finished, it's not end. And it seems, I'm sorry to say that, but we are like a chessboard. Syria like as a chessboard between Russian and like United States. For example, Barack Obama, he decided and he announced that he will attack Syria, and then he would like to ask the conference. Even like he can do that without asking. So it's a bit weird for us. And suddenly, Putin, he found this solution, like this peaceful solution for the chemical weapons, which like give Al-Assad longer time to longer life. So it's a bit like weird situation.
How disappointed is the Syrian opposition and President Obama calling off the strike?
Well, most of the opposition were disappointed, but I'm against their idea because also I said as before that it's not a solution because they can do something better. They can stop this war first and then to sit on the table and to find a solution a peaceful solution to gather all the Syrian people in one table.
And Sergei Shumleni, this focus on chemical weapons that we're now having seems a bit arbitrary, doesn't it? Let's look at the numbers. Only 2% of the more than 100,000 victims that the Syrian conflict has caused were killed by and through chemical weapons. Do you think this is a placebo discussion that we're having here?
Well, it is the only discussion that still can be carried out in this current situation. And of course, the killing with the conventional weapons that has already costed lives for thousands of people, and to be killed by a Kalashnikov bullet is not better than to be killed by sarin gas. And actually, the problem is that the country is pumped with weapons, and lots of people just hate each other. And I'm not a big supporter of the Russian foreign policy, but in this case, the Kremlin seems to be maybe at least partly right when they say that we cannot say who kills whom. We see that there are lots of people there from all possible countries of the world. Even the terrorists from Russian Caucasian region, Chechnya, are there, and they are involved in these killings. You see the terrorists from all possible countries. We don't know if the jihadists from Europe or even from the United States are trying to gain experience there. Who knows if they will return to Europe and to the US later. And in this situation, the countries, Russia, and some Western countries, and of course the Gulf countries, try to support their parties with weapons. Russia has over 5 landing ships in the Mediterranean full with weapons, who are bringing weapons from the Russian port of Novorossiysk to Syria like shuttles. Last year, Russians tried to bring weapons to Assad because the Russians said Assad is a legitimate ruler of Syria. We don't know why should we stop the contracts. They tried to bring weapons with a civil ship. It was stopped in the Northern Sea. Now Russia brings with military ships. Who knows who will be killed with that weapon? You're right.
It's quite a mess in Syria, Frederick Pleitgen.
Yeah.
How long do you think President Obama will give this diplomatic initiative?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, I'm sure that what's going on now does open up the door to a lot of stalling tactics. So they do have to set, I don't want to use the word red line in all this, but they do have to set some sort of time frame where they say, okay, if we don't see, it's got to be more than a week. You got to give them, if this is going to be a serious thing, then you have to pursue it a serious way. But you do have to see that if this really goes into a stalling tactic, and it's something that you can see fairly clearly, then yeah, you have to say, okay, all right, this is the end of the line. This is how far we're going to go, and we're going to conduct some strikes. And I'm sure the Americans would be willing to do that even without any sort of UN approval, and they would probably be right to do that even without UN approval, because the world public is going to be able to see whether or not all of this is right or not. But there's one thing that Sergei said that I sort of disagree with, is that if we say that it doesn't matter if you get killed by a Kalashnikov bullet or you get killed by gas, I do think that there's a big qualitative difference, because the Kalashnikov, as horrible as it is, it's all terrible, is a weapon that has some sort of purpose on the battlefield. Two sides go at it and they shoot each other. Gas has absolutely no value on the battlefield. The US and Russia realized that decades ago and started destroying their stockpiles. Gas is used to terrorize civilian populations. We managed to get an independent filmer into Zamalka, in the outskirts of Damascus, 3 days after the gas attack happened. The gas attack in Zamalka did not kill any of the opposition fighters. They killed some who came to help the people. It landed right smack in the middle of the most peaceful area of Zamalka in a civilian neighborhood, and the bulk of the people who were killed, who this person that we sent in saw, died in their sleep. That's what gas does, and that's why gas is not allowed to take hold in that conflict. As horrible as it is, and I know it's only a few of the people who were killed in the conflict, but if that takes hold, then everything else falls by the way. Any sort of conventions that might have been there, any sort of humanity that might be left in that country would be gone. And I fully agree with Hussam. I don't think that the Syrian society has gone beyond the point of no return. I do still think that most people there want to preserve Syria as a country that has sort of a multi-ethnicity. But it's more difficult every day because Al-Qaeda is getting stronger. The militants among the governing faction are getting stronger, using more horrible weapons. And one thing that I think is also clear is that Assad has obviously lost his legitimacy, the West says. But the only faction that I know that has even less legitimacy is the opposition that's outside of the country, the SNC. I have never met a person in Syria who feels represented by the Syrian National Council. So you have to, if you're going to try and find a solution, I don't know that those guys are going to be able to be part of it because they're sitting outside of the country. I don't know that they have an interest in stopping the conflict at this point in time. I haven't seen that yet. I mean, they haven't even managed to get any sort of leadership in their ranks. And every time there's a proposal on the table, they say, no, we don't want that. We want you to bomb Assad. That's not a solution.
And do you think the aim here on the part of President Obama is just to condemn the chemical use on the part of Assad, or perhaps even send a message to Iran and North Korea?
Well, the thing is that, yeah, of course, I mean, he said that he wants to send a message to Iran and North Korea as well, that this is something that's not going to be tolerated. That's something that Obama keeps saying in his speeches. I would hope that that they're looking to a more comprehensive strategy to try and stop the whole thing in Syria and to send a message to Iran and North Korea. But I'm not sure that it would, even if nothing happens on that front, I'm not sure that it would embolden North Korea and Iran because every case is different. And if the North Koreans really ramp up their rhetoric, the Americans, I mean, if it really gets bad, the Americans are just going to annihilate them.
So, Osama al-Din, I think it's been made quite clear both by Frederick Pleitgen and Sergei Somleny that Syria has become somewhat of a pawn for a much bigger game. Perhaps proxy wars are being played out in Syria. As a Syrian, how bitter are you? Do you feel abandoned by the so-called international community?
We feel, of course, sorry, disappointed, but also we don't have like a good opposition party or can make influence to the people who supporting them because we have now many parties and many groups, and unfortunately also as what we said before, we have Al-Qaeda now, we have Jabhat al-Nusra, we have the Islamists, so that's the most dangerous things now. So we cannot gather and to try to have one word and to sit together and try to discuss about how to find a solution for Syria.
Now, you think the point of no return has not been reached yet in the case of Syria? You think after everything's been said and done, a country like Syria or a country called Syria will still exist?
Like Iraq, we'll have the same example. In Iraq or Libya now, we have the same scenario. So the weapons still with the people. Most of those people, they're not well educated or trained how to use it or understand what this kind of weapons what can do. So no control at all. And unfortunately, I was at the Syrian border trying to help for medical support with MSF, and I saw a lot of Islamist people from Al-Qaeda, Jabhat al-Nusra entering, going. And even there's CIA and German intelligence, French intelligence were there, and they saw all of that. I think I blame all of this, Western country about this, what's happened in Syria, because they have seen everything, and they allow that, unfortunately.
And do you fear, as some do, that a strike by the U.S. would only embolden and strengthen the jihadist movement within Syria?
Well, I'm not really with that at all, because it could be worse.
Could be worse. Sergei Somleny, the Russian support for Assad has been steady, very unwavering throughout. What about the Russian people? How's the mood back in Moscow and the country? When you talk about Syria to the Russian people on the street, what is the mood? Is there rallying behind their president?
When you talk about Syria in Russia, the first response you get is about the US American. the anti-Americanism in Russia, within Russians, is very popular. According to the last year's polls, about 50% of Russians believe the US Americans are the enemies of Russia and they want to destroy Russia and to turn it apart. And in the last conflicts in the Middle East and in Yugoslavia, the Russians see the proof of these ideas, of these fears. As normal Russia, common Russian who watched Russian TV, which is, let me say, very anti-American too. He knows that the US Americans wait for the next victim to find some reason to attack it because they want to dominate in the world, etc., etc. So if you say about Syria, a normal Russian who is actually not very happy to see any Syrian refugees in his country because Russians are pretty nationalistic too, but he starts to be over-patriotic about Assad, and as Russians were over-patriotic about Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein, and you can see it up to the State Duma, up to Russian Parliament, the vice president of Russian Duma, Vladimir Zhirinovsky, who was a big fan of Saddam Hussein, his personal guest and supporter of Hussein. He is a supporter of Assad now, and he says that Russia should send military to protect Assad. Of course, it's populism, but it's what Russians say.
And many international experts are saying Vladimir Putin is the winner. He has portrayed himself as a global peacemaker throughout this deal. Frederick Pleitgen, you've been to Syria many times. You probably know the country better as any Western journalist, or as good as any Western journalist.
Some parts of it.
What is your mood when you're down there? I mean, we're just reporting on Syria from Berlin, from London, from Moscow, but you are actually on the ground in Syria. Give us an assessment. What is the mood there?
I think it depends on where you are in the country. I mean, I don't have very much knowledge of the north of the country, but what I'm hearing from a lot of people who are up there is that the mood there is at an absolute low point. In places like Aleppo, I think right now the opposition is making some gains again, but the opposition very, very much led by Islamists. And I know a lot of people in Aleppo they have this really almost disappointed feeling because they feel that this is slowly turning into an Islamic caliphate up there in the north of the country. And it's just not what many people want. But at the same time, they don't have the firepower to stop it. If you are in Damascus, you'd be surprised that a lot of people actually lead a fairly normal life on the government side of the fence. But at the same time, of course, in the outskirts, it's absolutely awful. And people see these bad things on the horizon. And I think that the chemical weapons debate really changed the mood of many people. I think it was a lot of people who sort of, you know, if you were on the side of Assad, you were more emboldened to stick with Assad because you were afraid of this big tide of Islamists that could roll into your place. And if you were against Assad, then you obviously were of a different opinion. But now the whole gas thing has just, it's really made people unsure of a lot of things. It's made people unsure of their government. It's made people unsure about whether they're going to be able to salvage this thing when the fighting stops. So it's very difficult. But at the same time, I can only say again, I do think that there is a chance there. And I had one experience which was actually very good. I went to the town of Tel Kalach, which is at the border with Lebanon. And there, an Alawite politician from the Syrian parliament had brokered a local ceasefire between the FSA rebels who controlled the inside of the city and the military that was on the outside. And you could tell, I went in with this politician to these guys, some of who were sort of Islamist, but not, you know, not the nasty kind. And they got along fine. And to me, I got this impression that if these guys stop fighting and start talking, then something good can become of this. And there's two things that are stopping that, I think, at the moment. One of them is the fact that Assad is there, and you're going to have to deal with how you can get some sort of transition going to at least put it up for some sort of vote of whether or not he stays. I don't think that you can just get rid of him and say, oh, this is it. And the other thing is the Al-Qaeda on the other side. Those are the two major factors that are stopping all of this. I think if you were to take those out of the equation, which is very difficult, then you can start talking about a slow reconciliation process. I think it's possible.
Give me your quick assessment. Do you think the United States still has the credibility that it once had?
No.
The United States still has the power, if you will, or at least
Well, it has the power. I don't think it has the credibility at the moment. I mean, with the way that the U.S. has been playing this whole conflict, the Obama administration wanted to stay out of it, and to the extent that it was involved, I think for way too long, both the West and the Russians on the other side saw this too much, as you said, as a chess game. They saw this as the Americans saying, "Oh, but if we don't get rid of Assad, you know, the Iranians are going to win and the Russians are going to win." At the same time, the Russians were saying, "Well, we got messed up in Libya, where we thought we were signing up to a no-fly zone, and all of a sudden NATO became the air force of the rebels. That's certainly not something we're going to have happen again." And I think that's caused the U.S. a lot of credibility. I mean, it's even on the opposition side, there are not many people who want the U.S. to conduct these airstrikes, because they know that it's another one of these half measures where if they just do pinpoint strikes, Assad is going to go out and say, "Well, I beat the Americans. I'm still here." And if they really weaken him, then the ones who are going to profit are the Islamists, because they have the most weapons and they have the best fighters. And it's a difficult situation.
And we may be seeing indeed the end of American exceptionalism, if you will, and American leadership in the world. Hussam al-Din, we're running out of time, but I do want to get a quick assessment from you. What, after everything's been said and done, what still gives you hope that things will turn out okay in Syria?
Well, my hope with the Syrian, not with the international and the community, because the Syrian would like to have a peace. They are fighting for peace, of course, except the Al-Qaeda and the Jabhat al-Nusra or the Islam. Because I said to you that when I was in Turkey, I was also filming in the same time, and I saw the people that were against that, but they take advantage of them, unfortunately. But people like Syrian people, they are, brave, and they will do something very good for Syrian.
Well, the Syrian people are brave, says Hussam al-Din, and we certainly hope that will be worthwhile for them in the end. I want to thank my guests for their insights, for a very insightful talk. I hope we've been able to answer some of the questions you are having out there. For now, thank you for tuning in, and looking forward to seeing you again next week for a new edition of Quadriga.